Hello, I'm Dale Hawthorne. Welcome to my channel. The message I got for you right now is talking about some strange little experiences I've had with churches, starting out with one happened when I was attending a church a few years ago. The pastor was preaching on the rich young ruler. I believe it was could have been from Matthew, Mark, or Luke, since all three have the story in it. And he kept on looking in my direction, even though I was and still am not rich, not young, and not a ruler. So that's why did that happen? I think I got some ideas, but before we go too much further in this, please click like and subscribe, and please share this video if it's been helpful to you, and look for other videos on my channel that may be interesting and helpful. So, continuing onward, I hate to say this, but even in the church and among fellow believers, many who really should and often do know better, you still need to be very guarded sometimes in what you say, especially on the subject of personal finances, and well as the subject too of career and job, and marriage and family, or if you're single, and your dating life. There's a sarcastic remark I made to a gal I dated briefly over 40 years ago. And I think that it got picked up and became a part of an informal dossier. People have dossiers in their memories about you going back for years. And I think it became a part of the dossier, which was put together by people who paid too much attention to gossip and had a part in keeping the rumor mill going. So that I made a brief remark, a sarcastic remark. It was about simply being able to pay like 10 cents more for a pound of butter to get one for something. And she said, well, how can you afford that? I said, oh, I'm rich. And I discovered that later that seemed to have persisted. A church across the country seemed to have an idea that I was rich. And I told my parents when I got back, this would have been sometime probably in 1983. My parents laughed and laughed when I told them that. So if I talk about being rich, I am rich. Not as far as money goes. God says that I've been blessed with every spiritual blessing in the heavenlies in Christ. And that's what I mean if I ever say that. Yeah, finances, I've had times when I've had more or less in my bank account provision. God has always provided for me. And He's always given me enough so that I can give. It may not have been enough, but even more. And even when I was working some difficult jobs, sometimes some physical jobs too that were kind of difficult, but I actually had a blast on them. I was working with people that I liked and doing physical work, and I treated it like an 8-hour workout. So that's the way it goes. Work is not demeaning necessarily, even physical work. If you turn up your nose at physical work, well, remember Jesus was a carpenter, someone who that was the job title, but really someone who did physical work for in that time that he was old enough to work until he went out in his ministry. So work itself is not demeaning. But we do have some real strange ways which we deal with others as far as finances go too. Just continuing on career, job, marriage, family, dating life. I've mentioned those from time to time. But there's a fire in my apartment building. Let's say, it would have been a little over 20 years ago, and I really didn't have that much that was that badly damaged. I had to get out and get a different apartment, move my stuff, but I ended up having to get a new couch. I miss that old couch. It was a couch I really liked, but the couch I have right now is actually better. But c'est la vie. And two mattresses got lost, which were 20 years old. Pretty much everything else I was able to salvage, survive. No, A couple books may have had um, some smoke damage on the first few pages, something like that. But I was quizzed about whether I had insurance by a pastor, as I was talking about, just seeking people to pray with me, work with me through this time of transition from one to the other after the experience, so I can tell more about that. But I said I had enough to cover it. In other words, I had an emergency fund and some personal savings. I didn't go any further into it because it really wasn't their business, and he knew that. And this is a church which had been following Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University and taught each fall and spring. And I personally have been following Larry Burkett on Christian finance for years. And so, yes, I did have an emergency fund that easily covered those losses. And a number of times, though, even though I didn't have insurance, I still paid for it, no problem. Didn't ask anyone for a penny. But for a number of times afterwards, that in conversations, I would hear that pastor loudly tell people around me about you got to have insurance. You got to have insurance. And personally, I've had sufficient assurance, not to go into that, but sufficient insurance for a single man with no dependents over the years. So people are so funny when it comes to finances in the church. Not long after that experience, part of our worship team brought in a prayer request for a couple in the church that was having marital difficulties because of financial problems. And she liked to use prayer requests. I found over the course of time to basically pass on gossip. And I said, we'll pray with them, sure, but were they aware that the church is offering Financial Peace University, which helped a lot of families in the church over the years? So she had no idea about it, even though it was announced in the services, part of the announcements for months. It somehow went over her head. But then I found this reversal. I heard something on the rumor mill, because even though I recommended Financial Peace University, found that even as I found some help there myself, and that they could even get a scholarship for that, something on the rumor mill came out that I was all about money. So I don't know how that happened. And this is just telling you how people are in our churches, how they need to grow, and they need to learn, they need to figure this stuff out, and what they say to each other, because a lot of times people are still working at a early adolescent level of ignorance about these matters. And this was a little while later that I found myself in another church that pastor kept on looking at me during the sermon of the rich young ruler, those not young, not rich, and not a ruler. And I think it was part of him trying to raise funds, because this was going on at that time, for what I thought then, and what I still think was an overreach for acquiring this building for this big ministry idea. And maybe he, just simply knowing the personalities involved, there was probably some sort of rumor mill, part of that social dossier that had been carrying on for years, that I was rich. Even after all those years, I'd been working jobs, and I think that he was expecting me personally to empty out my savings for what I thought was really an ill-advised ministry scheme in the time, that overextending himself for this building acquisition, when you really needed to have a greater awareness, I think, of the whole church, the whole body, that this is the way to go. I think, and pastors do get this. I think they get this great idea, and they find out that people will support it. And there's this old saying which goes back, that God's work and God's way will never lack for God's supply. And I think that this was a real overextension. So going onward, I was reminded of this. This conversation I had also, a friend of mine who, oh man, he had his birthday the other day, and we're connected on Facebook. And one of the friends I just like to be able to see a couple times a week, just simply to talk. And he mentioned to me how he doesn't tell his relatives anything about his finances because, as far as they're concerned, he put it this way: "I'm poor. I'm poor," which you don't want to lie to people, give them, but you still don't need to give them information which they don't need, which they may use against you, or become intrusive in some way, or may seek to. There are people who still try to cheat relatives out of money out of simple greed. So I think this even goes further, not just problems with gossip, rumor mills, and things like that, but also how discontent so many people are in our churches about their finances. And I'd say about the two other things too: marriage and family, and job and career. And let's take a look for a moment right now at what the New Testament advises, what God says in His Word. Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 and 6. Let your life be free from love of money, and be content with what you have. For He has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? The New Testament talks about avoiding the love of money, greed, and being content, avoiding covetousness, having your eye on what someone else has, wanting that for yourself, or even worse, to try to destroy that because you don't have it, which that happens too. There's envy, greed, and gossip, covetousness. So something which I wish someone would give me this advice like in 1975, that many years ago, 50 years ago. Be careful what information you give people in casual conversations. Even Christians can be extraordinarily intrusive about things which are really not their business, even though the Bible does say, First Thessalonians 4, to mind your own business. Those words are actually in there. And what information you give others in casual conversations can be embellished, exaggerated, and twisted. And there may be that submerged envy and competitiveness, that eye, the evil eye, on what others may or may not have. So we're called to keep our lives free from the love of money, be content with what you have. I will never leave you nor forsake you, so we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? And even the church, there will be those, as I just said, there will be those that have an eye on the money that they think that other people have. They may try to run some scams. I've known of people who have been in the church who have lost money to Ponzi schemes. Some guy with a line of basically BS came in the church selling. They lost lots of money to Ponzi schemes. And there can be long, persistent problems because a lot of people, as they're not growing in Christ, they're not learning, they become susceptible to mean and petty exaggerations and fabrications. And they have, as I've said in other places, a long memory for the wrong things, a long memory for mean and petty exaggerations, fabrications, bad ideas, and misinformation about other people, and many other things. This is one of the things that I think happens as you grow in Christ over the years. God sifts your memory, not in a hard way, but He'll confront you with things which you may think are right, but you are wrong. That may give you different perspectives on things that happened in the past, and so on. So if you do have trustworthy and safe people, candor can be really good. And this is one thing I thank God for. Friends such as the man that I spoke about and others over the years. Friends who can give helpful suggestions, but who can keep their mouths shut too, before, during, and afterwards. And people, I really thank God for those friends, and I can give you some names right now, and they would go, "Who, me?" And that's been the way they've reacted sometimes when I said that they've been helpful. Me? What did I do? Which is wonderful that they're just letting you work things out. And but as we go on, we don't need to give people who have a problem with greed, envy, and so on, who are self-seeking, a reason to turn their greedy and deceitful eyes on you. So be careful. And I think as churches, we need to develop an environment where offhand remarks are not embellished, exaggerated, and passed on as holy writ. You can make a joke sometimes, and people will take that joke even though it was not intended on being anything other than a flippant attended humor to ease, and they'll pass it on as infallible as the Bible itself, even, and they'll hold more to what they thought that you meant by that than the Bible itself. And this can be a real continual problem. I think it's actually gotten worse over the years. I hate to say that, but finding trustworthy and safe people, even inside the church. But yeah, as far as being content, something I mentioned earlier, be ready to give generously with what you have. I don't think anyone needs to know the personal giving of people in the churches, who the biggest donors are, because you might be surprised sometimes who the biggest donors are. Or even a pastor on a staff. I've said to the treasurers, when I served as a pastor, I don't need to know that. I don't need to know how much they're giving. And sometimes I've been surprised in churches where there are people who, treasurers who are doing the deposits, who have been way too loose about who's giving what and when. And I found sometimes even people who don't need to know or find out who's giving and who's not. And again, this tends to happen where gossipy, backstabbing behaviors are tolerated and flourish, where people exaggerate, embellish, catalog, and pass on offhand remarks in ways that they were wrong when they're done when you're 12 years old, and they never really seem to have grown out of them. And yeah, in our churches preach generosity as well as financial responsibility for oneself and one's family. It's a part of one's own walk before the Lord as being a steward of what he has given, a manager of what he's given under him, part of having a clean conscience and following his word. But that doesn't mean that we need to give inquiring minds what they don't need to know. And yeah, financial responsibility, generosity with giving. And I've actually, sometimes when I've been preaching, sometimes when I've talked about giving, and this hasn't been happening every Sunday because I never wanted to give anyone the chance, the impression that I was looking to get in their pockets for their money, or the church was. But yeah, generosity and financial responsibility, as the word says. But I noticed that church troublemakers tended to squirm if I actually did preach on giving, on tithing, on financial responsibility, even though I didn't direct it against them personally, didn't drop hints, drop names, look in their direction or anything like that. And I did a side look at I'm going to talk about tithing. You go over there. That's one of the things where not knowing how much people give can be a real freedom when you're preaching, because you don't know who the sermons that you may give about finances are going to convict the most. And you don't need to know. You're there to preach the word, not to personally convict people of what they're giving, or to enlist them in your schemes, or to go on further to get them to give to things to give to your salary if your Lord is already providing well for you. And even though I faced some lean times in the pastorate, God provided. The books that you see behind me, they're the main legacy I have, the biblical reference work, which I've kept simply to keep on getting in the Word. But again, I will say that we do have many in our churches, many careless, reckless things circulating around, products of someone's overactive imagination, uncontrolled tongue, unsubstantiating fabrications and twistings of things which revealed nothing about where a person really was with the Lord, his or her following Jesus, so on. And the Lord's commands on judging really don't apply to us judging someone else's personal financial matters. Generosity, financial responsibility are a part of living for the Lord, part of the whole discipleship thing, the whole thing about where Jesus said, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you in the Great Commission. Certainly, yeah, as far as possible, unless we're physically infirm or have mental challenges also, we should be seeking to earn our living as much as possible while we can. And we should be avoiding financial dependency and be scripturally wise and generous with what we have. But we be quiet and do not talk about what we do not know, what we may easily be a false impression, and we do not form an opinion based on ignorance and prejudice about any of these things. I've concentrated on finances right now, but also career and job, marriage and family, or someone's dating life. There may be things that people need to address, but those should be quiet conversations, not someone spreading something to someone else about what they think may be happening or what they may have highly misunderstood at best. So, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And just even thinking about this, that friend which I mentioned, that buddy of mine, I really look forward to having him because we can just sit down and talk as many times a week as we want to. So, thank you.